They always said the old corner store was nothing special, just cracked walls, dusty shelves, and a bell that jingled when the door creaked open. But for a little girl named Emma, that store felt like the thin thread holding her tiny world together. It was winter, the kind that made your fingers sting through worn-out gloves. Emma's shoes squeaked on the wet sidewalk as she clutched an empty cloth bag to her chest, her stomach growling louder than the wind. Inside the store, warm yellow light spilled out onto the street like hope. Emma pushed open the door. The bell gave its tired jingle. Rows of canned soup, bread, and boxes of cheap noodles lined the shelves like a feast she couldn't touch. Behind the counter, Mrs. Harris sat on a wooden stool, glasses perched low on her nose. She looked up from her ledger, pencil tapping. "Emma, it's late. You walking alone again?" Emma nodded, eyes darting to the bag of rice behind the counter, the one she'd seen her mama buy once, back when mama was still alive. She stepped closer, voice shaking. "Miss Harris, I don't have any money today, but maybe I can wash your windows or sweep the floor." Her small fingers gripped the counter edge, knuckles white. Behind her, a teenage boy buying soda snorted, called her beggar girl, under his breath. Emma's cheeks burned, but she didn't back away. Mrs. Harris's eyes softened, a storm of thoughts swirling behind her old glasses. She set her pencil down, leaned forward so close Emma could smell the faint peppermint on her breath. She didn't say yes, she didn't say no. Instead, she reached for the rice bag, then paused, looking at the skinny girl who tried so hard not to cry. "How about this? You take it home tonight, sweep my front steps when you can, and Emma, one more thing." She slipped 2 bruised apples and a tiny carton of milk into the cloth bag, so quietly, so gently that Emma almost didn't feel the weight. Emma stared at her, her lips quivered. But you'll lose money." Mrs. Harris just gave her a look, the kind that said, "Child, some things are worth more than pennies." Outside, Emma stepped back into the cold night, cloth bag pressed to her chest, warm for the first time all week. She didn't see the boy at the corner mocking her. She didn't hear the shop's rusty bell close behind her. She just felt the apples bump together in her bag, the rice heavy against her heart, and a tiny voice inside whispering, "One day, I'll return this kindness, I promise." Years passed like a row of half-empty shelves, some days better stocked than others. Emma grew up with that little corner store stitched into her memory like a patch on an old coat. Every morning before school she'd sweep Miss Harris's front steps with a broom taller than she was, just to feel she was earning every grain of rice, every apple slipped into her bag. But the world outside that dusty store was not as kind. At school, other kids would tug at her threadbare scarf, whispering "charity girl" behind her back. One winter, Emma overheard 2 mothers talking at the bus stop, their words slicing through the cold air sharper than the wind. "That Harris woman's a fool. She'll feed every stray in this town and have nothing left for herself." Emma stood there, clutching her old backpack, head down, ears burning. She wanted to spin around, to yell, "She's the reason I'm still here." But the words stuck like stale bread in her throat. That night, Emma lay in her narrow bed, the single bulb overhead flickering like a heartbeat. She dug into her pocket, pulled out a scrap of paper she'd kept since she was 7. "One day when I can, I'll give back." Her handwriting was crooked, clumsy, but she pressed it to her chest as if it were a gold coin. Outside her window, the corner store light glowed warm in the darkness, the only star she trusted. The next day, Emma stepped back into the store, her shoes still worn thin, but her resolve thicker than any coat. She handed Miss Harris a crumpled dollar bill she'd saved from cleaning dishes at the diner after school. "It's not much, but it's the start." Miss Harris looked down at the dollar, then at Emma's chapped hands. She didn't argue, didn't refuse. She just leaned across the counter and pressed a peppermint into Emma's palm. "Kindness isn't a debt, child, it's a seed. You plant it, you watch it grow." Outside, the wind howled down the street like it wanted to blow Emma away. But inside, something stronger than the cold took root behind her ribs. A promise that no matter how long it took, she'd be the one holding the bag for someone else one day. Emma didn't plan on leaving that street, but life has a way of packing your bags before you're ready. She turned 18 on a Thursday with nothing but a battered suitcase, the smell of stale bus seats, and an envelope of coins saved from wiping tables after school. The city outside the bus window was colder than she'd ever imagined. Glass towers, too bright, too empty. No corner store smell of bread. No bell jingling when you step inside. Just locked doors and plastic smiles. Her first job was at a supermarket downtown. She stocked shelves overnight, her fingers numb from the freezer aisle, her back aching from lifting boxes twice her weight. No one knew her name, just "Hey you, box girl." One night she slipped a dented can of soup into her pocket, not for herself, for an old man shivering outside the loading dock. Her manager saw the security tape. She almost lost her job over 60 cents. When her paycheck came, Emma didn't spend it on new shoes. She found the cheapest phone card and called home. The old payphone beside the bus stop crackling in her ear. Miss Harris's voice, thin but warm, spilled through the static. "Is my girl eating well? Are they treating you kind?" Emma's throat burned. "I'm trying, Miss Harris. I'm trying to be good, like you taught me." That night she lay on her tiny mattress in the attic apartment, the city's neon buzz humming like a broken lullaby. Inside her coat pocket she kept the same scrap of paper. "One day I'll give back." Even when the world forgot her name, that promise pressed warm against her ribs, like a grocery bag she could never put down. They say the city never sleeps, but for Emma, it never shut up either. Car horns, train whistles, people pushing past without looking, noise to drown out the voices in your head. Until one phone call made it all go silent. It was a rainy Thursday, cheap instant noodles for dinner, her uniform still damp from stocking the dairy aisle. Her phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Tran, an old neighbour from back home. They hadn't spoken in years. Mrs. Tran's voice shook more than the static line did. "Emma, child, I don't know if you heard. Miss Harris, she's not well." Emma froze, chopsticks slipping from her fingers. The noodles turned cold. The woman who'd filled her grocery bag when she had nothing now had no one to check if she ate, if she slept warm. The old corner store, the only light in Emma's darkest nights, now shuttered, dust settling over shelves that once fed half the block. Mrs. Tran's whisper crackled on. "They say the city wants to tear it down. She's too sick to run it now. And, well, you know the young folks. No one owes her nothing, so they say." No one owed her? Emma's chest burned, anger and grief mixing in the tight space behind her ribs. "But we do," she whispered to herself. "I do." That night, Emma lay awake in her attic room, the city's neon buzz flashing on her ceiling like a warning sign. She pulled the crumpled scrap from her wallet, edges soft from years of opening and closing. "One day I'll give back." Her fingers pressed it so tight her knuckles turned white. Outside, the rain battered the windows. Emma sat up, grabbed her old coat, the same one that smelled faintly of peppermint and rice sacks. She didn't know how she'd make it back, or what she'd do once she got there. She just knew this: sometimes the world forgets the ones who fed it, but Emma wouldn't, not while she still had breath left to keep a promise. Some people say you can't go home again. Emma knew that was a lie, because sometimes home waits for you, even when it's falling apart. The bus wheezed to a stop in front of the old block. Emma stepped off with her single duffel bag, shoes soaked by the puddle she landed in. She stood there for a moment, rain dripping from her hair, staring at the store that once fed her belly, her hope, her dream of becoming someone who gives back. Now its sign swung crooked on one rusty chain. The windows were dark. A "for sale" notice flapped in the wind. Paper turning to pulp, letters bleeding down like tears. Emma pushed the door open anyway. The bell above the door, the same tired jingle, let out a soft chime, like a sigh that had been waiting years to breathe. Inside, the shelves were half empty. A few dusty cans leaned together for company. The floor creaked under her feet, just like it did when she was a girl, sweeping for rice and a peppermint. Mrs. Harris lay on a narrow bed behind the counter, wrapped in an old patchwork blanket. Her hair was thinner, her hands smaller, but the kindness in her eyes hadn't aged a day. She looked up when she heard the bell. Her eyes squinted through the dim light, and then a soft smile cracked her dry lips. "My Emma, my girl who never forgot." Emma dropped her bag, knees hitting the old wooden floor. She grabbed Mrs. Harris's fragile hand, the same hand that used to slip apples into her bag when no one was looking. "Miss Harris, I came back, I'm here." For a moment it was just the two of them. No rain, no empty shelves, no city waiting to swallow up old stores and old women like they were nothing. There was only a promise, born from a handful of groceries, now finding its way home. When people walk by a closed store, they don't see a promise dying behind the dusty glass. But Emma saw it, clearer than ever. That night, she stayed with Mrs. Harris in the little back room. The shelves behind them half bare, but somehow more precious than the city's biggest supermarkets. Mrs. Harris drifted in and out of sleep, her hand still curled around Emma's fingers. Every time she woke, she whispered the same question, a fragile, fading hope. "Did anyone else come?" Emma's throat burned. She wanted to lie, to say old neighbours still dropped by with soup and flowers, but the truth weighed heavier than the rain outside. "No one yet, Miss Harris, but I'm here, and tomorrow the doors stay open." By dawn, Emma had scrubbed the glass, wiped every dusty shelf, and stacked the few good cans front and centre, like a tribute to the kindness that once hid inside brown paper bags. She taped a new sign to the door, written in her careful, trembling handwriting. "Open, pay what you can, if you can't, take what you need." Some called her foolish when they passed by, peered in at the girl kneeling on the cold floor, counting coins into a rusty tin. A man in a suit poked his head in. A realtor, eyes full of dollar signs. "This place is worthless, you know. That old woman's debts, they'll bury you. Better to sell while you can." Emma looked him straight in the eye, her back aching from hours on her knees. "This place saved my life when I had nothing. Now it's my turn to save it." The man scoffed, the door swung shut, and the old bell over the door jingled like it was laughing in his face. That night, Emma sat beside Mrs. Harris again. She fed her spoonfuls of broth, warm, simple, enough to whisper, "You gave me a chance to grow, now let me give you a place to rest." Outside, neighbours walked by, some slowing down to read the sign. A mother pulled her little boy closer, nodded. A teenage girl slipped inside, left $1 on the counter for a loaf of bread she couldn't afford yesterday. Tiny seeds, planted at last. Some debts take a lifetime to repay, and some hearts never forget where they ate their first warm meal. Word got out. First it was the old postman, his hair now thin as morning mist. He shuffled in one rainy afternoon holding a creased IOU note from decades ago, his hands trembling more than the paper did. Emma looked up from the register, just a dusty tin box really, and smiled so wide the old man nearly wept. "I came to pay what I can, and to say I'm sorry it took so long." Emma took the note, pressed his palm shut around the coins instead. "Keep it for the bus home. You gave back just by coming here." Next came a young mother, one Emma had never met, but her father once borrowed sugar from Miss Harris's shelf when he couldn't afford medicine for her as a baby. She placed a small bag of apples on the counter, fresh, bright and sweet, like the ones Mrs. Harris used to sneak into Emma's grocery bag. "I don't have money, but my orchard's yours. If anyone needs fruit, they won't go hungry." Outside, a few passers-by peeked through the windows, some shaking their heads, muttering, "She's a fool, charity's a hole that never fills." Emma heard them. She let them talk, because inside the store was warm again. The shelves no longer felt so empty when hands kept giving what they could. That night, Miss Harris woke for a moment, her eyes milky, but clear enough to see the outline of neighbours leaning against the counter, voices soft, steps careful like they were treading holy ground. Emma leaned close, her voice just above a whisper. "See? They remember. You didn't feed this street for nothing, Miss Harris." The old woman's dry lips cracked into a smile that carried more years than any account book ever could. "I always believed kindness is slow, but it never loses its way home." In the doorway, the crooked bell jingled again, not with loneliness, but like an old friend laughing. "I told you they'd come back." Sometimes the brightest lights burn in the quietest corners, especially when a whole street gathers to keep a single bulb from going out. Emma hadn't slept for 2 days. Her hands were raw from scrubbing old shelves. Her back ached from bending over the till, counting coins that never seemed enough. At night, she'd sit beside Mrs. Harris, wiping the fever sweat from the old woman's brow. By dawn, she was back on her feet, taping handwritten signs on the store window. "Pay what you can, need help? Come in." One evening, she almost fell asleep over the register, forehead pressed to the cold counter. The doorbell's faint jingle jolted her awake. It wasn't another customer, it was Mr. Reynolds, the gruff handyman who once owed Miss Harris for bread and never came back. He cleared his throat, eyes darting away from Emma's stunned stare. I heard you needed help fixing the door hinge. This old place deserves a door that doesn't squeak like a dying cat." He knelt right there on the dusty floor, toolbox open. No charge, no debt. Then came Clara, the teenager Emma had once spotted slipping an apple from the shelf years ago, too shy to ask. She showed up with a bag of warm rolls from her job at the bakery. "For Mrs. Harris," she said, cheeks flushed. "And for you. I know what it's like to be hungry." Emma took the bag, hands trembling. She caught herself blinking fast, fighting the tears that always threatened when kindness walked in uninvited. That night, with the store's only bulb flickering overhead, Emma sat beside Mrs. Harris's bed. The old woman stirred, breath shallow but eyes soft when they opened. Emma brushed a damp strand of hair from her forehead, whispering what she knew the tired heart needed to hear. "They're coming back. Piece by piece, the street is giving back to you. You're not alone, Miss Harris. Not now, not ever." Outside, the sign still glowed in the window, a promise in cheap ink that meant more than a neon billboard ever could. In the hush of that small room between old shelves and the smell of warm bread, Emma felt something bloom in her chest, the sense that even the smallest act could outlive the hands that gave it. They say when a candle burns low, its light flickers the brightest, just before it fades. That night, the store stayed open longer than it had in years. Emma didn't bother turning the sign to closed. She knew kindness doesn't keep business hours. Inside, Mrs. Harris lay small and pale in her creaky bed behind the counter. The same counter that had once hidden 1,000 apples, coins and IOUs nobody asked to repay. One by one they came. The old postman who once brought her bread. Clara from the bakery. Mr. Reynolds wiping his dusty hands on his pants. They stood in that little room, their voices hushed, but their presence louder than any debt ever owed. Emma knelt by the bed, her hand wrapped around Mrs. Harris's paper-thin fingers, skin like fragile parchment but warm. For a moment the old woman's eyes fluttered open, milky but clear enough to find Emma's tear-filled gaze. "Emma, you kept the door open." Emma's throat tightened so hard she could barely get the words out. "You gave me everything when I had nothing. Now it's my turn." Mrs. Harris's lips trembled. A ghost of her old smile flickered there. "Not just you, child. Look." Emma glanced over her shoulder, saw the half-circle of neighbours pressed into the tiny room. Some held warm bread, some old notes they'd kept for decades. None brought riches, but every single one brought proof that a good heart never works alone. Mrs. Harris took one last shaky breath, her voice a whisper. "Promise me, you'll keep feeding them, even when I'm gone." Emma nodded, hot tears slipping down her cheeks and splashing onto their joined hands. "I promise you'll live here, in every bag of rice, every loaf of bread, every smile." Outside, the streetlight flickered like a heartbeat. In that final moment, the little corner store was brighter than any skyscraper downtown. Long after the funeral flowers faded, the old corner store's bell still sang its soft chime every time someone stepped inside. Emma kept her promise. She cleared the shelves of dust and replaced them with jars of rice, baskets of bread, crates of apples, the kind Mrs. Harris once slipped into her empty bag without ever asking for a penny back. She put up a new sign on the door, hand-painted, rough but sturdy. "The Harris Grocery. Take what you need, give what you can." Some nights, the wind rattled the windows. Some weeks, the tin box behind the counter held more IOUs than cash. Sometimes people scoffed, "You're just inviting freeloaders." Emma let them scoff, because every time someone stepped through that squeaky old door, a mother with too many bills, an old man whose pension never stretched far enough, they walked out with more than food. They carried the warmth of a kindness that refused to die. Word spread, not through billboards but through whispers and thank yous. A teacher left envelopes of coins when she could. A boy who once stole a loaf now stocked shelves after school. The same old postman dropped off apples from Clara's orchard every fall. Every single act a stitch in the patchwork quilt Mrs. Harris started decades ago. One rainy evening, Emma stood behind the counter, watching the bell swing above the door, just like when she was 7. A little girl tiptoed in, eyes wide, fingers tangled in a threadbare scarf. She clutched an empty grocery bag to her chest. Emma knelt down, smiling through a tear she didn't bother to hide. "What do you need, sweetheart?" The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Just a little rice, maybe some apples." Emma reached behind her, filled the bag until it was heavy, not just with food, but with the same promise once given to her. "Come back whenever you need, and when you can, help someone else too." Outside, the rain kept falling, the street cold and dark. But inside, the store glowed warm, shelves full of food and stories that would never run dry. The door stayed open, for the lost, the hungry, the hopeful, like a quiet beacon that told the whole world, kindness never closes. Sometimes the smallest kindness, a handful of rice, an apple, a warm smile, can last longer than any riches we leave behind. We don't always see the seeds we plant, but somewhere, someday, they bloom when the world needs them most. Thank you for choosing to spend these moments with this story. If it touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Your words keep this corner warm for everyone who stops by. Don't forget to like, share, or subscribe if you'd like more gentle stories like this. Take care, and I'll be right here, waiting to share the next story with you soon.